Alrighty, welcome in everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, July 15th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about the SEC Media Days. They get underway today in Dallas. We will break down everything you need to know, some big-time talking points, the schedule, everything that you guys need to know going into these Media Days. Then we'll get into Kayden DOr and the incredible job that he has done at Bama since he's taken over in January. Everything is moving in the right direction for Alabama right now. So we'll break down why this year is so important for him and why it feels like they might just be picking up right where they left off with Nick Saban. Then we'll get into one of the biggest things that will be a huge thing to watch throughout this year, which is essentially luck or wins in those one-score games that are decided by just a little bit of luck. So we'll break down some of the teams that I think could get some luck this year, some teams that I think could not get some luck this upcoming year. Then we'll get into the most important freshmen in the Big 12. We've done the SEC and the Big 10. We'll get into the Big 12 today, and then we'll finish it off with Monday questions. And we're going to talk about the Texas Longhorns. A ton of questions around that university, around that team going into the season, and I have about 4 of them today that we'll break down. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all, we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to kind of have a fun, interactive experience here, and that's always good for the both of us. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. But let's jump right in, because the SEC Media Days are getting underway today over in Dallas, and there's a ton to talk about. There's no two ways about that. We're only 40 days out from the season officially kicking off, and there's going to be a ton of things that come out of this week up in Dallas that are going to be really, really interesting to watch. So let's jump in here, and what I want to start with is just the schedule for this week. We're going to start today. We get LSU, Ole Miss, 2 teams that are going into this year with a lot of question marks, but also a lot of hype. There's definitely, especially Ole Miss, it'll be very interesting to hear from Lane Kiffin today. We'll get Shane Beamer. We'll get Clark Lee today. So definitely a ton going in. We'll get those players as well from those teams. So cannot wait to hear from some of those guys. Then we'll have Georgia and Kirby on the second day. Obviously will be the main event, but also Brent Venables making his appearance for the very first time. And then Missouri and Tennessee, 2 teams with a lot riding on this year, a lot going into this year. That will be there as well. Wednesday is a huge day as well. We have Bama starting it off. Everyone's going to be asking Kayden DOr a ton of questions. Billy Napier has questions on the other side of things. You know, how are you going to handle this season? How uncertain is your future? That type of thing. And then we'll get into Mississippi State, a team that is kind of going to be on the bottom part of this conference, but definitely a very interesting project this upcoming year for Jeff Lebby. Then we'll get into Texas, obviously. Texas and Steve Sarkisian coming in for the first time. That will be a huge event. There's no two ways about that. And then the last day you have Arkansas, Auburn, Kentucky, Texas A&M. So Sam Pittman will get some questions about his job and his security. Hugh Freeze about how they're kind of gearing up over there at Auburn, Kentucky, and A&M going into years with some very, very interesting expectations, I would say. But let's get into some of the biggest talking points for this, and the biggest one has been the biggest one the entire offseason, and that is Nick Saban is no longer going to be at these SEC media days. It is the first time since 2007, 2006, I think 2007 since he's been there, so very, very weird. There's no two ways about that. Kayden DeBoer will be there in his stead, and it's a new era of Bama football. There's been a ton of reports about how certain things are different. The practices are a little bit less intense. There is some music playing. There's a little bit more of a relaxed nature around that program, and it'll be fascinating to hear from the head guy. He took the job on January 12th, 2024, and since that day, he's just been off running. There were a couple of bumps with some members moving to the NFL, his staff members, but overall, he's got through that, and he's just done an incredible job. They've been adding just incredible amounts of recruits this upcoming cycle, currently sit atop the rankings for the On3, and we'll get into that a little bit in next segment. But the thing that everyone was worried about, kind of including myself to a certain degree, was recruiting, and he has subsided that plenty for every Bama fan and has made that worse for every fan that was hoping that that was the case. But every time I hear him speak, I get more confident about this team and this program going forward, and I'm sure this week will be no different, honestly. But it'll be interesting to hear how he's handling the transition for taking over for the greatest of all time. But then another obvious one is Texas and OU making their very, very first introduction to the SEC. There will be a plenty of questions. I promise you that about this coach, these coaches, and how they're preparing for this upcoming season. And if Quinn Ewers gives us a little bit of something like he gave us back at the Manning Passing Academy, we'll have plenty to talk about, that's for sure. But at the end of the day, there's going to be so many questions about, how is Texas heading into the season? How is OU heading into the season? We'll get to hear from Quinn Ewers. We'll get to hear from Jade Barron, the leaders of either side of that ball, as well as Kelvin Banks, a fantastic offensive lineman for them. So just cannot wait to hear from a lot of those guys. Frankly, I think Jade Barron, outside of Quinn Ewers, might be the single most important player for Texas this year if they want to succeed. So it's going to be awesome to hear from those guys. And then on the Oklahoma side of the ball, you have questions at the line of scrimmage. There's no two ways about that. There will be no representatives there, which would kind of would be a very cool thing to hear how those rooms are coming along. But the group that they have are great. It's the leaders of this team, Jackson Arnold, Billy Bowman, and Danny Stutzman. Danny Stutzman and Billy Bowman are two of the best at their positions in the entire country and will definitely be huge for this team this year. So just cannot wait to see what they have in store. And then you get to kind of the awkward part of this week. Billy Napier and Sam Pittman walk in with a ton of questions about their jobs. Going into this year, you would have to think at least one of these guys is likely out of a job at the end of the year, possibly both of these guys, depending on how the season goes for them. But it's going to be really interesting to see how they're looking at this season, how they kind of see the expectations for this season, and if those are reciprocated in the fan base and in the media, because that's really going to define a lot of this. How do we look at Florida this year? Is 6 wins enough? Is 7 wins enough? Is 8 wins enough? Because that will likely define if Billy Napier sticks around for longer than this year. So that'll obviously be a very interesting thing to watch. We likely won't get a ton of big-time quotes out of these two, but at the end of the day, it'll be fascinating to see just kind of their demeanor going into this season for sure. The big-time thing that I'm watching, maybe closest of all, is all of the quarterbacks that will be in attendance. 11 of the 16 teams are sending quarterbacks to Dallas. We're missing out on guys like Connor Wegman and that guy right there, Nico Iamaleava. It does stink, I'm not going to lie to you. Not hearing from those guys is not ideal. But at the end of the day, we still have plenty of guys to unpack. Frankly, the biggest surprises to me are no James Pierce for Tennessee, which is very interesting. I thought he definitely would be there. And then no Will Campbell for LSU. I thought he would absolutely be there. So very, very interesting choices there. But at the end of the day, the quarterbacks will not be hard to come by, that's for sure. You will have Carson Beck there, Quinn Ewers, Brady Cook, Jalen Milroe, Jackson Dart. All of these guys will be so interesting to hear from because all of them are expecting the same thing this year. They all want to win an SEC title. They all want to go to a national title. That's what they expect, and frankly, I think all of those teams can do that. Obviously, Missouri is walking a tighter tightrope than a lot of these other teams, but at the end of the day, all of those guys have big-time aspirations for this year, and hearing from them will be very, very interesting, especially someone like Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers and Jackson Dart because of the Heisman hope that they have going into this year. And then the guys I'm really excited to hear from are guys like Peyton Thorne, Graham Mertz, Jackson Arnold. I think all of those guys are going to be super, super important this year because I think there's a disruptor among them. I think there's someone in that group that is going to create problems this year, whether it's Graham Mertz winning 8 games at Florida and creating problems for some of the guys up top, or Peyton Thorne taking down Bama in the first year without Saban, or Jackson Arnold being a guy that is protected a little bit better than we expect right now and just slings the ball all over the field and becomes one of the best quarterbacks in the conference this year. So there's a ton going into this group in particular because someone in this group is going to play spoiler. Someone in this group is going to ruin the chances for another team, and it's going to be really, really interesting to watch. But overall, the number one guy that I want to hear from the most is Jalen Milroe. There's no two questions about that. I don't know if there's a person at this meeting outside of maybe Kaylen DeBoer that I'm more excited to hear from because his connection with Kaylen DeBoer, the life after Saban, hearing about how the team is handling that, all of the things that are going into the season for Bama, they all go through this kid. He is the most important player for them. He is maybe the most important player in all the SEC, outside of maybe Carson Beck. But at the end of the day, a very, very important player. And it'll be really interesting to hear how he kind of talks about Kaylen DeBoer, how he talks about Nick Sheridan, the OC, how he talks about some of the new changes in the program, because he's seen it all. He's seen what Saban does. He's seen what Kayden DOr does, and it'll be fascinating to see from the leader of this team what it kind of looks like behind the scenes. And then finally, we got to be on the lookout for conference realignment stuff. There is even more smoke around the Big 12 in Clemson and Florida State, but at the end of the day, the SEC can pretty much get in whenever they want, and Clemson and Florida State would jump at that opportunity. So maybe there's a little bit of movement here this weekend. Obviously, whenever you have a amalgamation of reporters and decision makers in college football, there's going to be some things that come out. I don't necessarily know what that's going to be. It could be just reaffirming what we heard from Brett McMurphy when he said they're not interested at all. Maybe that's just what we hear, but at the end of the day, we're going to hear something. I feel very good about that, whether it's from the SEC or from another conference, because of what we hear from the SEC media days. So it'll be really, really interesting to watch that. I think that's something that definitely will be defining in a lot of ways, no doubt about that. And then some other points that are going to be interesting to watch. Kirby Smart will have to address the off-field issues that have been going on at UGA. Definitely will be something that it'll be really interesting to hear what his answers are to those questions, because something has to be done, but I'm sure he feels like he's done just about everything he can. So it'll be really, really interesting to hear from him. And then on top of that, they're trying to bounce back up to the top. So it'll be interesting to hear from him, especially post-Saban. They can take this conference by the throat, and it'll be interesting to see what his demeanor is. Guys like Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers walking in with Heisman hopes. We talked about teams with promise this year. Missouri, Tennessee, LSU, Ole Miss will be fascinating to hear from about how they're viewing this upcoming season. And then any news around the House settlement and allocation of revenue sharing is always something we should be on the lookout for, and something we will definitely update you with as it comes through. So tons of stuff. There's no two ways about that. The SEC Media Days are always so much fun every single year, and this year is going to be the exact same. There's no two ways about that. It might just be even more explosive than it usually is. But at the end of the day, it's going to be awesome to listen to that. But let's move on. Let's take our first break here. When we come back, we're going to talk about Kayden DOr. He's been doing just absolutely incredible things at Alabama for the about 6 or 7 months that he's been the head coach there, but that doesn't change that everything is working exactly how he wants it to, and this year is going to be a really, really interesting case study to see what the future is under after Nick Saban. So we'll break all that down right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows with 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just did a little bit of an update on the SEC Media Days, broke down all the biggest talking points going into this year. Obviously, Texas and OU joining the conference, no Nick Saban, which will be a huge topic of conversation, and also one in this new segment. And Alabama has been doing absolute work on the recruiting trail right now, and it's kind of sparked a question in me. Can Kayden DOr just pick up where Saban left off? I know that sounds crazy, and frankly, when I first thought about it when he was hired, I shrugged it off. I immediately thought, no one can do what Nick Saban did. No one can pull off what he pulled off. But I've been warming up to this idea, if I'm being totally honest. I think I do want it to be known before I really jump into this. Picking up where Saban left off doesn't necessarily mean he needs to go on a dynasty run, win 6 national titles in the next decade or so, and do just ridiculous things as the Alabama head coach. Because the reality was, Bama was likely taking a step back heading into this new era regardless, as a lot of teams in the upper echelon of this sport, we're going to take steps back during this new era. I mean, the SEC just added 2 very real players in Texas and OU. Those are going to be very important people. And then the 12-team playoff adds some hurdles. There's no two ways about that. You got to win more games to get to that coveted trophy at the end of the yellow brick road or whatever you want to call it. And then finally, no longer having to visit in the SEC. Obviously, they were in the SEC West, so they were already playing quite a tough schedule, but adding UGA to the schedule every now and then is not going to be an easy thing. So the reality was they were going to take a step back. That was just what was going to happen in the future of college football, but Kayden DOr is walking into a situation that was going to be tough regardless of that. Even if you are already going to take a step back, it could be quite large if you don't hit every single button the correct way, and he's doing that thus far. So it's going to be incredible to watch this team kind of develop over the years, but as of right now, I am struggling to find questions about Kayden DOr in the future at Bama. So I think the biggest thing in year one, obviously, and it's going to be a huge year for him for a million different reasons, but there's so many huge things to break down. Obviously, taking over for that guy, there's always going to be a bunch of things, but at the end of the day, apologies, messed up the segments there we go. But that guy right there, Jalen Milroe, is the most important player for this team. There is no two ways about that, and he has to get better at a very, very specific thing. That's the good news, actually. If you're a Bama fan, you don't wonder what the issue is with Jalen Milroe. You don't, search for it because there's not that many, to be totally honest with you. His legs are absolutely incredible. He throws a deep ball as well or maybe better than anyone in the entire country. It's incredible what he can do, but a jump needs to be made in what I like to call and what some people like to call a level 2 throw. Those are the throws where 10 to 20 yards or 10 to 25 yards depending on how you cut it, and it's kind of layering balls. It's putting a ball over a linebacker and under a safety, or over a corner and under a safety in zone coverage, whatever that looks like. It's those throws that make NFL quarterbacks. Whenever you talk about an NFL level throw, it's never the deep ball. It's never the one that, you throw 50 yards downfield and there's an open receiver running and he catches it, because most people can make those throws and they should be able to if you're a starting quarterback, especially at Alabama. But the ones that are NFL throws are the outs that are 20 yards downfield, are the digs that you have to fit into a window. All of those are hugely important throws, and they're the ones that Michael Penix just made a living off of last year. Jalen Milroe needs to do that. He needs to be much better in that category, because if he isn't, then this offense is going to miss something. It's not necessarily going to be bad, because I think the run game is going to be really, really good and give them a good foundation, but if they want to hit the lofty goals that they absolutely can, that's the guy that needs to come together. There's no two ways about that, and that's the one thing that he needs to do a lot better. But moving on to the schedule, there's going to be so much going into this year because, frankly, there's not a off week. I mean, they do get Mercer later in the year. That will be kind of a layup game, but to start the year, Western Kentucky and South Florida are not easy. I understand they should be wins, and if they're not wins, then we have a little bit of a problem, but WKU is going to throw the ball all over the field. Whether it's TJ Finley or Caden Veltkamp at quarterback, they're going to throw the ball, and they're going to be in attack mode from the jump. And if you're a Bama fan, you know that back end is a little bit of a worry, which we'll get into here in a second. And then USF, I mean, that Bama game last year, obviously Bama did not play their best football by a long shot, but USF played a part in that game, and they got better from a year ago. So this could be a game where Alex Golesh goes out there and tries to get his signature win as a head coach. I don't necessarily think it's going to happen, but it definitely is more of a hurdle than some teams have in those 2 out-of-conference games. Then you get into Wisconsin. Wisconsin's a big one, and then you get a bye. And then it's the biggest game of year one for Kayden DOr, and it's against Georgia at home. You don't necessarily have to win that game. I'll be totally honest. I don't think they have to win that game to do all the things they want to do, but that game will be very telling. It will show what the fans' expectations are going into that game. The reaction coming out if they do lose will give you a lot of idea of how they're going to handle the rest of the season depending on how it goes for Bama. So I think that's a game that not only will define the SEC hierarchy for quite a bit now, but at the end of the day, it will be very, very interesting to see kind of just how that game goes and the reaction from the fans after that game. The MLB draft coverage, I cannot remember when our MLB show is on, frankly. It's a little bit later in the day. I'm sure Sam will have you totally covered with everything that happened last night. Definitely a huge night in MLB, so he will definitely have you covered a little bit later in the day. I'm not exactly sure what time, but late afternoon, I believe, is when he's on. So definitely tune back in then. But Bama fans, obviously, getting back to this, the biggest worry here is the back end. You got to have a really good back end if you're going to compete in the SEC this year, especially with the quarterback play that you will be facing in the SEC this year. And having Malachi Moore and bringing in Keon Saab from Michigan makes this a little bit easier. But I do still have my worries. I think there is a big difference between Bama being good and Bama being elite because of how many good quarterbacks they're going to play, because of how many times people are going to attack you through the air throughout the year. You're going to have to be ready to go in a lot of these games. I mean, you get Georgia in week 4. It's not like you have a ton of time to really get up for that game and get ready for that game on the back end. And the guy that's going to hold probably the most power in how good they're going to be on that back end is Xavier Meny. He is so important. He's coming in as a freshman, and he's going to start as a freshman. There's no doubt about that. He is absolutely going to be the starter across from Domani Jackson, who is another guy I'm a little bit worried about in that back end. So the corner positions are not necessarily where you'd want them to be, but it doesn't mean they're not talented players. They absolutely can play really, really high-level football. It's just it might take them a little bit of time, which could be a little bit of a worry because that WKU game, while they should win it, if that back end shows a little bit of vulnerability during that game, then other teams are going to take notice of that and they're going to attack them. So a poor back end can absolutely lose you 2, 3, maybe even 4 games depending on how bad it is. So it's something that could kind of torpedo this season for Bama if it's not handled the right way and if they don't come out pretty much swinging right away. And then the final piece of this bunch, frankly, is the biggest one of the bunch. Saban is gone. This is no longer Saban's Alabama. A new era has officially started at Bama, and it's not going to be a Saban type run. I'm just being totally honest. We have not seen anything like what Saban did for those 14, 15 years while at Bama. And the big question is, what's the fan reaction when that happens? Because, frankly, it's just going to happen. Even if Saban was the head coach, there was no world where they were winning 6 national titles in the next 14 years just because of the hurdles that we talked about earlier. College football is a really, really fickle sport. People change their opinions wildly, very, very quickly. Honestly, on a week-to-week basis, they can change their entire opinion on a head coach or a player or a team overall. So the reality is, what happens when they lose a game? We talked about the Georgia one. What happens when that game falls? Because Bama fans, I think they're saying all the right things right now. They're saying, we'll be fine with a 9-3 season if it gets us, going in the right direction. If we see some of the things that we need to see, and if we're still recruiting at a high level, which they are right now, everything will be fine. I don't think that's the case, if I'm being totally honest. I don't think there is a Bama fan out there that can look at their team sit around 16th in the country and be 9-3 and be satisfied with that. I'm not saying they're going to be calling for Kaylen DeBoer's job or anything crazy like that, but I do think it could define the rest of his time there. What's to say this Bama team couldn't fall on their face a little bit? Maybe they have some bad injury luck and they go 6-6 and things get just terrible down there. And then what's the reaction? I think that would be the sky is falling. But at the end of the day, you obviously have these grand expectations for your team, and you should. You're Alabama. There's no two ways about that. You should be expecting big-time things from your team every single year. It doesn't change that a step back is likely going to happen. There's likely going to be a little bit of a learning curve this year, and that likely will lead to 1 or 2 losses in the regular season. How Bama fans handle that will likely define how Kalen DeBoer goes forward as the Bama head coach, because having those fans behind you is huge. If you don't have the fans behind you, it's only a matter of time until the boosters don't get behind you, and then you don't have the AD fully behind you, and then that causes a whole other problem. So Bama has everything in place. There's no two ways about that, and everything is going to do. They're going to be a really, really big player going forward. I feel very confident in that, frankly. But they just have to understand that it might be a little bit of a learning curve the first year. Just maybe. It definitely could be a very, very good year, but at the end of the day, if they win 9 games, if they even win 8 games the first year, how people react to that will definitely be a huge thing for Kalen DeBoer going forward. So I think the overall sentiment I have around Kayden DOr is he's going to be incredible for Bama. I really do believe that. I think he's going to do really, really incredible things. I don't think he's going to do Nick Saban things, because doing Nick Saban things is just ridiculous. Watching it every single year, I got more and more confused how he was able to pull off what he was able to pull off. But it doesn't change that Kayden DOr knows how to coach football. He's really, really good at coaching football. He can do so many different things, and he's one of those guys that is only getting better in my mind. And he put a staff around him that is really second to none. There are so many good staffs around the country, and maybe I wouldn't put Bama number one overall, but they would not be far down that list. I can promise you that, especially a guy like Courtney Morgan, who came in and has just done an incredible job recruiting. He is one of the biggest names in all of the sport that you might not know. So definitely a lot going into this year. A couple of things have to happen for them to be the Bama that everyone's gotten used to. Be the Bama that's in the playoff, that's winning national title, that's doing all of this stuff. They have to have Jalen Milroe be that special player. They have to have him take that step forward in those level 2 throws, those NFL level throws. The back end has to come together fast and fairly fast. I'll be totally honest with you. Pretty fast, at least by week 5 when they face off against Georgia, because if it's not set up then, you will lose that game and it will probably look ugly while it's happening. And then the fans got to give this guy a little bit of slack. He just took over what is going to be one of the toughest jobs in quite some time, and giving him just a little bit of time is going to be very beneficial for this program. So, frankly, I think Bama's going to have a great year. I think they're going to go about 10-2 in the regular season, possibly make the playoff, and then we'll see what happens. But at the end of the day, even if they don't, I think it could be a very successful season, and they could be heading off to a really, really good era of Bama football under Kayden DOr. But how people react to that will be a very interesting thing to watch. But overall, I think there's definitely some interesting expectations. I think Anthony over here said it's definitely unrealistic for certain Bama fans to expect 12 wins, and I fully understand that. Definitely shouldn't be expecting 12 wins this upcoming year. I don't think anyone should, if I'm being totally honest, at least in the regular season. But at the end of the day, if they keep moving as a program, if they keep being Bama, at least behind the scenes, I got no worries about this program going forward. So Kayden DOr has started really hot, and he's likely to continue being really hot throughout his career at Bama. So it'll be fascinating to watch that. But let's take our second break here, and we'll talk about luck when we come back. We'll talk about those big-time games, those one-score games that likely decide whether you are a national title team or a team that's fighting to get into their conference title. So we'll break all that down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about Bama and all of the things going into the new Kayden DOr era and how it's starting off really well, and it might just continue that way for quite some time. We have a question over here. Do you think the old school Bama... That will be an interesting thing. There's no two ways about that. I think there's definitely going to be a lot of... There's going to be a lot of change, let's just put it that way, on the scheme side of things, especially on the offensive side of the ball. I think Kane Womack will be a lot like what they like to do down there, but the offensive side is going to be a huge adjustment, and how Jalen Milroe especially adjusts to that this year is going to be probably the most defining feature if we're talking about Bama this upcoming year. But let's get into luck, and let's talk about the one-score games that define every single season. Over the last couple of years, we've seen some really remarkable runs. TCU and Washington took the world by storm and really made a lot of fans throughout the year, and it happened a lot in these games, in these one-score games that they were able to pull out off just will, honestly, over anything else. But let's start with Washington. I mean, they went 8-0 in one-score games a year ago, just absolutely ridiculous clip. They've been doing incredible things. Old Dominion had 11 one-score games, which is just ridiculous in and of itself, but they're the only team that's won every single one-score game a year ago. So that was what they did. They played really, really good football. They played really well on the lines of scrimmage for a lot of the season and did a ton of things that you need to do to win those one-score games. You know, not make mistakes, not beat yourself, do those things that just make sure that you're always going to be in the game. And then when you have Michael Penix and those slew of receivers, you're always going to have a chance to win it at the end. And then TCU went 6-1 in one-score games, and the only loss they had was the Big 12 championship game to KSU. That didn't end up mattering. But they also beat Texas. They also beat number 8 Oklahoma State by one score. So that was a team that was defined by that. And that was a lot of the veteran leadership of some of the guys on that team, but also just Sonny Dykes just being incredibly good at scheming those guys open and getting this team to be exactly who they need it to be, which is not necessarily overly special or do anything crazy, but execute. Day after day, just execute what they want to do, and they did that to just a ridiculous degree. So this year feels like we might just have multiple of these teams heading into this year because of the expanded field, because of how many games that I think are going to be really close this upcoming year. I think this one's going to be just a little bit more expansive when we come to this group. And I want to start with the group that Tom Fornelli was talking about over on CBS. He had kind of a luck index that he broke down for everyone, where he took the one-score games from last year and the one-score game, or took them from last year and essentially tried to pin down who were the teams that he was watching in particular, who were the teams that he found most interesting going into this year. He obviously tabbed TCU as a team that could bounce back from an 0-4 one-score games in 2023 back to at least closer to what they had in 2022. Washington was in the step back of the luck category. When you go 8-0 in one-score games, it's very unlikely you'll do that again this year. And then he also had teams like Kansas State were 1-4 in one-score games, even going 9-4 in the season. They were 1-4 in one-score games. If you even flip that on its head, that's a playoff team, no question about it. A&M went 0-4, definitely a team that could use some more. Virginia 2-5, and then teams like Louisville went 5-1. Missouri went 4-0. Northwestern went 6-2. Ole Miss went 4-0. So some of those teams could take a little bit of a step back in that category in terms of luck. But let's get to the teams that I think are really interesting, that I think could possibly make some noise in this category this upcoming season. And it starts with Oklahoma State, if I'm being totally honest. I think this is a team that just fits the mold of what Washington and TCU were the last couple of years. And the biggest things that those two teams had more than anything else, and I understand they had incredible playmakers on the outside for both of those teams, the running games were what made those teams go. Period. End of story. If they didn't have Dylan Johnson on that Washington team, and if they didn't have Kendre Miller on that TCU team, they are not nearly the teams that they're going to be, and they definitely don't win those one-score games the amount that they did. I can almost promise you that. So where are those teams? Where are those teams that are going to have that nice run game? We're going to have that explosive offense that can, score in an instant and be able to play that solid defense and not beat themselves is likely the most important thing here. I think Oklahoma State is really interesting in that respect. Obviously, Ollie Gordon is the guy. He's going to be the one that they build around all season, and definitely that first week, apparently, according to Mike Gundy. But at the end of the day, Alan Bowman being the quarterback again is huge. Having someone that just knows how to execute the offense. I know he doesn't light the scoreboard on fire. I know he doesn't do anything that is Caleb Williams-esque or anything crazy like that, but execution is the name of the game. There's no two ways about that, and he does a really good job, and it could be a very good, potent offense if they put it together. They were 5-1 in one-score games, so it could flip on them the other way. There's no two ways about that, but when I look at this team and I think about those one-score games when all you need to do is just play your game, execute, make sure you don't make mistakes, Oklahoma State might be at the very top of that list of the teams that can do that. And then another team that is a little bit more off the beaten path, but Georgia Tech, I think, is really interesting in this one because when you look at what they did a year ago, they were only 2-2 in one-score games, did lose a game by 9, so splitting hairs there. But at the end of the day, I think this is one of those teams that really just needs to play a little bit better on defense. It doesn't need to be drastic improvement, but just play that inch better on defense. Get a pick or two in one of these games, in one of these big-time games. Stop defenses at a 15% better clip on third down or 20% better in the red zone, whatever that looks like. Just make this defense take that little step forward. The offense will take care of the rest. I think this is a team that just needs to play consistently week over week. If you look at their schedule from a year ago, the 6-6 that they got to was a winding road. It was all over the place with a loss to Bowling Green and a win over Miami. So a very, very weird team. But if they can find that consistency week over week, they can really make some noise and win some of these really tough games. And in a place like the ACC that I think one-score games are going to be plentiful, any team that can win the most of them is going to have a huge, huge success rate. But then finally, Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech is another team. We talked about the ACC. It's wide open, and this is a team that returns just so many guys. There's absolutely no holes in this team, if I'm being totally honest. But a year ago, they did go 0-3 in the one-score games, including a loss at home to Purdue and NC State, and then on the road at Marshall. So those can't happen. Period. End of story. The Marshall one just can't happen in general. But overall, I think tons of experience returning. Those can absolutely turn into wins. And the schedule's really nice to them. They do get Miami and Clemson, but those are really the two inflection points. They avoid NC State, Florida State, Louisville, some of the other teams that are going to be thorns in the side of a lot of ACC teams. So it's a attackable schedule for this team, and definitely a team that can be really interesting. So I think they could absolutely make a run. If you split those Miami and Clemson games, I think you're in good shape to be in Charlotte at the end of the year in the ACC title game. So it'll be really interesting to watch that. And then a couple of teams that I expect to take a little bit of a step back in the luck category. And let's start with the national title winner a year ago. Michigan, not to say they had a ton of luck, because this is just a downright good team. There's no two ways about that. Frankly, they only played 3 one-possession games last season, and obviously they won them all. But at the end of the day, they did get some bounce of ball plays throughout the year that definitely helped them on that track to get to that record. But at the end of the day, this is going to be a team that, if you're coming into this year with already less margin, that's just the reality. If the luck goes against you as well, it could kind of spiral a little bit. So I do think this is a team that is going to be able to do all of the things that we just talked about with some other teams. Play really good defense, not hurt themselves, have a really good run game. But also, when you come off a season like they just had, where it felt like just everything fell into place perfectly for Michigan to find their way to a national title, I think it's human nature to take a little bit of step back. Now, a step back could be going 10-2, which wouldn't be too bad by any means, but I do think there's a reality where you're just likely to take some type of step back, especially with the experience walking out the door. So that'll be a really interesting team to watch. And then I kind of want to unpack 2 teams here that were mentioned by Tom Fornelli that are really interesting going into this year. And the first one is Ole Miss, because the reality is, most people are betting on this team to be a huge player this upcoming year and possibly be a national title winner. And they went 4-0 in these games last year, including against teams like LSU and A&M that could easily flip this year and flip their entire season on its head. So I don't really worry about the talent. I think the talent's going to be totally fine, and it could offset this a bit for the Rebels. They could not have to deal with it as aggressively as I'm expecting, but the reality is this is a little bit of a reason to worry. What if those bounces go LSU's direction instead of Ole Miss's, or A&M's instead of Ole Miss's? And it'll be interesting to see if that takes a little bit of a step back. And if it does, how much does it really affect this team? How talented are they to overcome that? And then Missouri is a team that I want to unpack because they went 4-0 as well in these games and got some really big wins during that stretch. But at the end of the day, if this is going to happen, if they are going to take a step back in that category, it'll be somewhat because of luck, but it'll also be because this defense is just totally different. Chris Abrams-Drain, Enos Rakestraw, Tyron Hooper, all of those guys leaving are huge. And I think they've done a great job of backfilling that roster and making it one that's going to be solid this year. But if they take a step back in those one-score games, if they miss the mark in some of those games, that's probably where it's going to be had. That's probably where the issues are going to lie, and it'll be really interesting to see how they can kind of handle that. So one-score games are the thing. They are the moniker between a good team and an elite team. If you can win those games when your back is up against the wall, a lot like what Georgia did or what Michigan did throughout the season last year, you're going to be one of the elite teams in the country. But at the end of the day, sometimes it's just luck. Sometimes it's just a ball bouncing your direction and you being able to pick up the fumble instead of lose it. So it'll be really interesting to watch all of that. There are some teams on that list that have title aspirations, and it could be that some of this luck comes into play and does away with that. Some could get that title luck and it goes in the direction and they make some things happen. So it'll be awesome to watch this, and definitely will be a defining feature in this upcoming year especially, but it'll be interesting to watch. But at the end of the day, let's take our third break here. When we come back, let's talk about the most important freshmen in the Big 12. We've gotten to the SEC, we've gotten to the Big 10. Let's get over into the Big 12 and break down just so many teams, because everyone's a contender in this conference. But stick around and we'll be right back with that.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about the secret to a title run. That is essentially luck. In those one-score games, the teams that tend to come out on top in those games are the teams that tend to find their way to the national title or to the playoff, or at least in that conversation. So that'll definitely be a very interesting thing to watch throughout the year. But let's get into segment 4 here, and let's break down the most important freshmen in the Big 12 this upcoming year for all of the conference contenders. There's a lot of them, so we'll go ahead and jump right in here and move rather quickly through these groups, because there's a ton of guys to break down, and frankly, there's not too many freshmen that are going to be playing huge minutes this year in this conference because of the experience that just litters this conference. But there are a couple of guys that I definitely think could make some noise, or if they're called upon, could be huge players for their teams. And I want to start with Qui Lopez. He is a linebacker over at Utah now, and frankly, a big reason that I'm picking him is because of the logo that is on his chest right there. St. John Bosco is different. They are one of those high schools that if you go there and you start there, you are a different type of athlete. You are a different type of football player, and you approach the game in a different type of way, and that is all business. There's no two ways about that. They do just incredible work with so many great guys. That's actually where DJ Uiagalelei went way back in the day. So it's a remarkable school, and I think this kid is just another great player from this group. Obviously, the big kid in this freshman class is Zach Wilson's little brother, Isaac Wilson, who was just incredible in the spring day and could be their starter next year. But at the end of the day, they need a little bit of help on that defensive side of the ball in depth at that linebacker position, and I think this is a guy that absolutely could give it to him right away. So he could emerge as kind of a star and be huge for this team this upcoming year. But let's move along to Kansas State, and they have a wide receiver named JJDemps, and I absolutely love it. But he is someone that I think is going to be really interesting, because at the end of the day, Kansas State is not going to use a lot of young guys, but some guys are just special, and I think this might be one of those guys. I think when you talk about a team that your quarterback's big thing is he's going to be running the ball a lot, that's his big moniker, having the number of weapons can never be enough. You need as many as you possibly can, especially in that offense. So adding someone that's a little bit younger that has some attributes that maybe some other guys don't have will definitely be very helpful to you. So I think this is one of those guys that might just fill in the gaps more than anything else, but at the end of the day could be a big player this year and definitely will develop into a huge player for the Wildcats down the road. And then I'm sticking at wide receiver for this next team. Trey Griffiths is a huge player for Oklahoma State this upcoming year. I think they have that front line of really, really talented veteran guys at Oklahoma State at the wide receiver position. Beyond that, you get a little bit nervous, right? You get a little bit worried about what if one of these guys goes down? What are the rotations going to look like if all of these guys can't play as many snaps as you want them to play? And I think this is a guy that could fit into that conversation. He's an elite track and field athlete, someone that is going to be just really hard to keep off the field in some respects. So I think he's someone that might just fill in the gaps, kind of like JJDemps that we were just talking about, but could be a huge player nonetheless for the Pokes. And then Kansas, it was rather easy. Deshawn Warner is a huge player. He was the best player in the class, and it's the biggest need on the team in edge rushing. I think they absolutely need a big-time edge rusher. By Job coming over from Michigan State was absolutely huge for this team, but you need more. There's no two ways about that. And I think this kid could be absolutely huge. He's an absolute pure pass rusher. There's no two ways about it. He's very, very, very quick with his hands, very fast off the edge, and someone that I think is going to develop into a really good pass rusher throughout the year. I think someone like By Job could help him a ton into becoming the player that he's capable of being, but he might just have to become it pretty quickly if this team wants to be and do the things that they want to do. There's no two ways about that. And then Iowa State, it's an O-lineman, like Iowa State would want. But A.J. Burton is a huge player for this team, and he's kind of funny. I can't exactly remember who the player was, but there was a player earlier on in this series that might not start, and A.J. Burton is probably not going to start first week for Iowa State. I feel pretty confident in that. It doesn't mean that he couldn't be thrust into action. And if you're thrust into action, especially behind the guy that he's currently behind, Jared Hufford, who is the best lineman that they have, there's going to be a lot on your shoulders. And frankly, I think he might just be the plug-in guy, the guy that whoever goes down, he might just be the first one off the bench, because I think he played tackle in high school. He's set up to play guard in college, so he can fit wherever you want him to fit. He's a very, very talented player, and I think he has a really, really bright future, but he might just have to come along pretty quickly for this team to be successful on the offensive line, at least in terms of depth. And then UCF, I look no further than Qui Birdsong. I think you had to look to the defensive side of the ball. The offense is pretty much spoken for. Gus Malzahn had brought in so many different guys, and he did on the defensive side as well, but they still need a little bit of help. I think this defense needs that little bit of a spark, that someone that maybe they're not thinking about right now, but ends up being a big player. I think this kid could be it. He's definitely a little bit leaner, as you can see, for that linebacker position, but is someone that can do a lot of really good things. Can play in coverage, is kind of that sideline-to-sideline type guy that you really, really do like. And I think whenever you have a defense that is going to be struggling, you need guys that are just flash in the pans. For whatever reason, they find it on weekends and they do just incredible things, maybe 3 weekends out of the 12-week season. That's the type of player that he could be, and that could be all that UCF needs, frankly. And then Micah Hudson was the easy one on here. I'll be totally honest, there's two very easy ones. He was the one, and he's one of only 2 5-stars that were recruited into the Big 12 this last cycle, which gives you another reason why there's not a lot of freshmen being used in the Big 12 this upcoming year, but I think he's going to be on the field early and often. Frankly, I think he's going to start the very first game, because he's impossible to keep off the field. There was everyone after this kid. I mean, Texas wanted this kid as bad as really anyone in the entire country. Texas Tech ended up getting him, and it's absolutely huge. And I think he's someone that could join that Michael Crabtree level of wide receiver at Texas Tech. I know that sounds crazy as a freshman coming in, and he's a very different type of receiver, but he can do some really, really incredible things in that uniform and could become the guy that Texas Tech fans remember for quite some time. I can promise you that. So very excited to see what he can do this year, but also just throughout his career at Texas Tech. And then Arizona, I have a running back because losing Jonah Coleman is absolutely huge. Jordan Washington, I think, is going to be huge for this team. A freshman coming in that is going to fit very nicely next to Ja'Cory Croskett-Merritt. I think he's someone that definitely can be huge for this team. I think the defense is going to be very experienced when they face a lot of these defenses across the Big 12, whether it's Utah, Kansas State. They have a ton of guys that know exactly what they need to do, which means all of these offenses in the Big 12 just have to be multiple. They have to be able to attack you with 4 wide receivers and 3 running backs and a couple of tight ends and just make it really tough for you to key in on guys. So I think Washington could be that guy that just keeps defenses guessing just a little bit more than you normally would. And then West Virginia. Zay Jennings is someone who has really popped up on campus and just immediately turned heads. He was an absolutely huge player. I think he'll be mostly rotational in that back end at safety this upcoming year, but at the end of the day, he's going to be huge. I think he could be in a starting role by the end of the year, and if West Virginia is going to make some noise, they need some guys to step up. They need younger guys to play big-time roles and possibly be someone that makes a all Big 12 team and does some things that maybe you're not expecting them to do, but if you're in that West Virginia spot where it's just that mess in the middle of the Big 12, you're going to need some things to fall your way, and Zay Jennings absolutely could be that guy for West Virginia. TCU has Kyle Lemman, a starting kicker that is going to come in and take over for a big-time player in Griffin Kell. He was huge in that 2022 run, was the I believe the Lou Groza Award winner. I could be wrong about that, but in 2022 he was a fantastic kicker, was all Big 12 in that year, and was it last year as well. So now it's this guy's chance, and he's coming from South Lake Carroll, a very, very good school out in the Dallas area, but this is a very, very talented kid, someone that can absolutely make some noise pretty much right off the bat. I think he's going to start, and frankly, TCU is going to be in close games. Sonny Dykes does not shy away from close games, and it feels like it's something that's going to follow him for quite some time. So the kicking game is huge. When they had Griffin Kell at his very, very top form, they won all of those one-score games. When they didn't, they lost a lot of those one-score games. So having someone like Lemman come in, he's got to be really good pretty much right away if they want to win those really close games that could define their season. And then finally, maybe the easiest of the bunch, Jordan Seaton for Colorado is huge. There's no two ways about that. This is the other 5-star that was recruited into the Big 12, and you need this guy to be incredible pretty much because there is an inverse correlation between the amount of time Shedeur Sanders is sacked and the amount of times that Colorado wins football games. The less times that he is on the ground, the more wins you have, period, end of story. They absolutely need to keep this guy upright, and he's being thrusted into the second biggest position on the field at left tackle. So he's got to be ready to go, and I think he's plenty talented. I think he's cut from the same cloth of the Will Campbell, the Kelvin Banks, who came into their school, started as a freshman, and did some really good things, but also struggled a little bit throughout the season because they are freshmen, and it is going to be a little bit of a adjustment period. So it'll be fascinating to watch. He may be the most important player for Colorado outside of Shedeur Sanders this upcoming year, but Shedeur Sanders isn't all that important if he's on the ground. So it could be that Jordan Seaton is the most important player. But at the end of the day, that might be just the most important freshman in the entire country outside of Dylan Raiola. Let's just say that. But there are tons of guys that are going to make some noise in the Big 12. Obviously, a more experience-ridden conference than some others, but at the end of the day, there are going to be some guys that are going to have plenty to say about this Big 12 season. But let's take our final break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the Texas Longhorns. We're going to get into Monday questions and ask 4 big-time questions that will totally define what the Longhorns can do this upcoming season and who they can be at the end of the season, how people will view them at the end of the season, more importantly. But we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just continued our freshman lookout of all the impact freshmen for all of the conference contenders. Just got into the Big 12. We'll do the ACC tomorrow to wrap up that segment, but let's get into Monday questions, and let's talk about the Texas Longhorns because I have a ton going into the season. There's no two ways about that. They might be one of the most interesting teams going into this season, and one of the biggest questions is very, very specific, but it has so much to do with what Texas can be this upcoming year. How is Quinn Ewers deep ball? That is the big time question mark around pretty much every Texas fan's head right about now, because there were a ton of missed opportunities down the field for Texas a year ago. Quinn Ewers is a fantastic quarterback, and anything between 10 and 20 yards, or anything 20 yards and in, is money. There's no two ways about that. There are very few quarterbacks in the country that are better than him when it's 20 yards and in. Beyond that, it gets a little bit sketchy, and he missed a ton of big-time opportunities, and opportunities that could make these really close games that you've seen from Texas over the last couple of years a little bit wider, and definitely make them a little bit more comfortable of wins. And the Texas wide receiving core is going to be fast. They're not only fast, they're stupid fast. It's just insane the amount of guys they have that can just go on that offense. But at the end of the day, you got to be able to hit them. And that's the big time question mark for Quinn Ewers. One of the things that I've seen over the offseason, I believe it was Daniel Jeremiah that was breaking him down, and he was scouting him and said his deep ball is one of the prettiest balls in all of the country. He just puts too much air under it. He just allows these really speedy wide receivers that you want to put a little bit of air under it and let them run under the ball, but you can't just float the ball up there and then it looks like a sitting duck. I don't know if anyone saw that TCU throw that got picked off that was remarkably saved by Jordan Whittington, but that was a bad ball, and that was the epitome of what Daniel Jeremiah was talking about right there. And that's the difference this year. If he opens that up, if he hits that ball consistently, he has Heisman written all over him. I'll be totally honest with you. There are very few passes that this guy can't make. If he makes the deep ball passes, it's just going to be almost game over for every defense that faces Texas this upcoming year. And then watching him, the biggest thing is just the timing of the footwork. There's a lot of things where it's all arm and not a lot of feet going into it, not a lot of the lower body going into the throw. And if he can time that up, it's going to be a very beautiful ball. There are a couple of balls from a year ago. There was another one against TCU where he hit Xavier Worthy. I think it was his best ball he's thrown at Texas. It was just absolutely incredible the way he threaded that ball in there. And I think it's one of those things where he just needs to go out there and trust his arm. He needs to do everything on time. He needs to do everything in rhythm. And if he does that, he's going to be more than fine. So if he takes a step forward, Texas offense will take that little step forward. If he takes a big step forward, they could be outright unstoppable on the offensive side of the ball. And Quinn Ewers could be lifting a Heisman Trophy and a national trophy at the end of the year. So it'll be very interesting to watch that. But that might be one of the biggest things. And to go with that, how do the wide receivers pan out? They brought in some big-time transfers and some really good transfers, but how do they fit into this offense? Do they fit in the way that everyone is hoping they will, and can they make the plays that you need them to make? Because you lost some really good guys from a year ago. Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell, Jordan Whittington we just talked about, Jatavian Sanders as well. All those guys are out the door. And you added Isaiah Bond, who is going to be the marquee name. He's the headliner. He's the guy that's going to be on all the quarterback wide receiver duo rankings that you'll see as the season starts to come up, and he's the one that will likely be the highest draft pick at the end of the year. But the other two guys are really, really good as well. Matthew Golden is someone that I think is going to be a huge target for this team. I think he's kind of the glue guy, for lack of a better term. I think where some of these other guys might not necessarily fit the mold as well, being speed type receivers, Matthew Golden does. I think he's going to be huge for this team just to keep the chains moving, third down type guy, that big body that can make really any play on the field. So a very, very important guy for them. And then the one that I think is going to turn the most heads, the one that I think is going to make the most noise is Silas Bolden. I think this guy is just absolutely insane. He showed up on campus probably about 2.5, 3 weeks ago at this point, and people already love him. They already think he's going to be one of the biggest players on this team, and he's a much more polished route runner than a lot of people thought he was going to be coming in. They compared him to Xavier Worthy in that respect, which is very high praise. But at the end of the day, he's going to be hugely important, and I think he's someone that Sark is just going to love. You can line him up all over the field. You can use him all types of ways. And once you get the ball in his hands, he's a very, very special athlete. So I think he's going to be hugely important. They absolutely need these guys to step up. They need these guys to hit. I think as long as two of the three hit, they'll be more than fine. But frankly, it looks like all three of them are going to be fantastic players. And on top of that, you have a slew of young guys that I think are going to be great, including Jonte Cook, DeAndre Moore, a ton of others. But at the end of the day, there's going to be a ton on these three transfer receivers. And if they come together, I think this could be, again, just a ridiculous offense in so many different ways. And then another big question mark, those D linemen. How do you replace Byron Murphy and Tavondre Sweat? Because that was the difference maker a year ago. That was the reason that Texas won as many games as they did, and that's the reason they had one of the best seasons they've had in quite some time, were the two guys up front. They were hugely important, and they dominated defensive lines or offensive lines pretty much every single week of the season. The OU and Washington games were a little bit tough at times, but for the most part, the line of scrimmage just absolutely belonged to Texas throughout last year. And frankly, they have the guys this year. I think Alfred Collins is going to be a really good player. He's uber athletic, someone that absolutely has just been kind of missing the mark just slightly over his time throughout Texas. Has made a couple of plays here and there, but if he is on the field consistently, I think he's going to be a big-time player. And then Vernon Broughton is someone that I think is going to be huge in terms of a run-stopping threat, someone that can really open a lot of doors, just being a space eater more than anything else. And then they gotten some big-time transfers that will absolutely play a huge role. And it starts with Bill Norton. I think he's going to be the starter at nose tackle for this team, and it's because of just how darn big he is. He is a huge player that absolutely is fantastic against the run. Arizona had one of the best run defenses in the country, and he was a huge part of that. Jermaine Lole is also another huge-time player they stole from OU late in that transfer portal cycle. They also got Tia Savea, so another transfer from Arizona. So huge players just coming in on that D-line to add to guys like Sadir Mitchell and Jare Bledsoe that are the younger guys that absolutely make some noise. So you brought in Kenny Baker from the NFL ranks. He is a hugely important guy. The recruiting has started off slow. It started off a little bit tough for him, but at the end of the day, if these guys perform this upcoming season, it'll fix itself very quickly. I can promise you that. And he came here for development. That's why he was hired by Steve Sarkisian. And if he can do that, then no problem. They'll be more than fine on the defensive line, and then the recruits will start to roll in. So I think this is going to be a huge year for Texas on that line of scrimmage, because if they miss this year and get dominated, it's going to be really hard to recover recruiting-wise because of having an NFL guy at that position. But if they can perform and do what they did a year ago, or at least 75% of what they did a year ago, I think they'll be more than fine going forward at that position. And then what's the biggest threat to Texas as they move into the SEC this upcoming year? Because everyone's talking about all the hurdles, and the one thing that I've heard a million times is the physicality. Texas can't handle the physicality of the SEC, and I totally do agree that there is going to be a learning curve by no stretch of the imagination. There's going to be a little bit of a learning curve, understanding that some of these games that would have been a little bit easier in the Big 12, at least on your body, are going to be a little bit harder to recover from and to get up for the next week. So I do think that is a real reality. But if you want to go look at the average weight and height of the O-line and D-line at Texas, be my guest, but they have the dudes. There's no two ways about that. If you wanted to go body for body in the SEC and did just entire rosters against each other, Texas would rank very, very high. The physicality is not necessarily going to be an issue, at least on paper. There could be some things that break down throughout the season that make it a little bit tougher, but I do think they're going to be more than fine, really, at the physicality perspective. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to have problems. And the biggest worry that I have is there's this philosophy over at Texas, this moniker that I'm sure you've heard around Texas, all gas, no brakes. And it's something that Steve Sarkisian brought in and he's kind of kept throughout his time. That has not been the way he's called plays in some of his games. I'll be totally honest. He starts just pedal to the metal. He starts really, really fast, has a beautiful designed 15 plays, does an incredible job getting his team on the board early. And then he just kind of sits on that lead. He gets up by 10, 14 points and says, okay, if we can stay up by 10 or 14 points, we're walking out of here with a win. that cannot be the way that he calls plays this year, because if it is, you're going to lose those games. I'm just being totally honest with you. That Kansas State game was very, very close, and it did not have to be in a lot of respects. There were some play calling things that happened throughout that game that just didn't need to happen, whether it was in the second or third quarter or just portions of different quarters where they just go stagnant, and it makes absolutely no sense. But at the end of the day, when you're playing all these incredible offenses and when you're attacking teams like Georgia and teams even like Oklahoma and some of the other teams that they're going to have to face, you don't have the ability to take your foot off the gas. You don't have the ability to say, okay, we have a good, 2-possession lead. Let's just start to run the ball more often, run the clock. You can't do that unless, it's the fourth quarter and late in the fourth quarter. Then I'm more than fine with that. But Steve Sarkisian would start doing it in like early third quarter or late second quarter, and it would cause so many problems down the stretch where their offense just wasn't good in a lot of stretches of last season. So this is one of those things that can be fixed. There's no two ways about that. And Steve Sarkisian, I think, understands that it's something that has to be fixed. But you can't have games that go down to the wire every single week in the SEC and expect to come out unscathed. You're going to got a lot of those games, and you got to make sure that you hit on pretty much every single play. So when he comes out and has a beautiful 15-play drive and they score a touchdown, the next drive's got to be just as good, and the drive after that's got to be just as good. You won't be totally successful every single drive, but you got to be able to at least keep your foot on the gas and at least be executing the way that you execute as Texas. Don't get away from your game plan. Don't get timid or worry about just keeping the lead. Go after it throughout the entire game, and if you don't, then I think there's a couple of more losses on here that we maybe don't see right now for Texas. So that was my biggest worry for Texas throughout all of last season and going into this season is, if you take your foot off the gas, what happens? Because in the SEC, it could be a lot worse than what it was in the Big 12. But it'll be very interesting to see what the play calling looks like going into the season and how it kind of develops throughout. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We just have incredible people doing awesome work across every single sport you could want. So definitely come over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. Today is the day that College Football 25 comes out, so at 4 p.m., I'm sure a lot of you will be loading that up just like me, so cannot wait for that. Might be back with a review tomorrow, honestly, but at the end of the day, thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.